In early 1971, an icy and desolate landscape welcomed the arrival of a new family. The farm in Rhode Island, with its vast snow-covered terrain, seemed straight out of an ancient tale, full of mysteries and untold stories. The main house, imposing and aged, stood out in the middle of the field, surrounded by skeletal trees whose bare branches danced in the biting wind. Built in the 18th century, the residence exuded an aura of times gone by, with its weathered wooden walls and windows that seemed to hide dark secrets. The camera zooms in on the main entrance, revealing a heavy oak door, the hinges of which creak in a melancholy tone when opened. The interior is vast, with long, dark corridors, decorated with antique furniture and paintings of ancestors that seem to follow visitors with their penetrating gazes. It is in this dense and charged atmosphere that Roger and Carolyn Perron, accompanied by their 5 daughters, enter to begin a new stage in their lives, without knowing that the secrets of the house were about to be revealed. The first days in the new house were one of adaptation and curiosity. The family explored every corner, enchanted by the grandeur and history of the place, until Roger Perron, a hard-working and dedicated man, decided that the tranquility of the countryside would be ideal for raising his 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cynthia and April. Carolyn Perron, his wife, was a kind and caring woman, always looking for the best for her girls. Together, they decided to leave the hustle and bustle of the city behind and embrace the simple, peaceful life that the farm promised to offer. In January 1971, with the harsh winter still present, the move to the new property marked the beginning of a new journey for the Perron family. The house, with its 10 bedrooms, seemed like the perfect place for the family to grow and prosper. Roger was enchanted by the vast expanse of land, imagining countless possibilities for cultivation and animal husbandry. Carolyn envisioned a home filled with happy memories and children's laughter echoing through the hallways. The children, although apprehensive at first, soon became involved in the adventure of exploring the corners of the property, each creating their own favorite corners. The move was quick, and soon the family's belongings were scattered throughout the house's large rooms. Although the initial excitement was palpable, it didn't take long for everyone to start noticing something peculiar. The air always felt cold, regardless of the crackling fire in the fireplaces. A feeling of uneasiness slowly settled in, like a shadow creeping silently through the house. The first signs were subtle, a noise here, an inexplicable draft there, but gradually, the presence of something beyond human understanding made itself felt. As Roger and Carolyn tried to maintain normalcy for their daughters, strange events began to intensify. Girls reported hearing whispers and footsteps when no one was around. Fear began to take over, and the nights, which should have been restful, became long and tormented. The farm's stories began to unfold in hauntingly vivid ways, and the Perron family realized that the peace they had long sought was threatened by forces they could not see but certainly felt. With each day that passed, the feeling of unrest in the house increased. The family began to investigate what could be causing the inexplicable events, not knowing that the answers they would find would be more terrifying than they could have imagined. The house itself was an impressive structure, a true farmhouse with a rugged, rustic feel. Consisting of 10 rooms, each one was a testament to the past, full of stories and secrets kept within the ancient wooden walls. The rooms were large and spacious, with windows that let in natural light during the day, but at night seemed to frame the darkness outside. On the first floor, the house had a large, rustic kitchen, where the family would gather for meals. A large wooden table occupied the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs that gave the room a peculiar charm. The living room, with its imposing fireplace, was the heart of the house, where the Perrons spent the cold winter nights trying to warm themselves, both from the cold and from the strange sensation that enveloped them. The decor was simple but welcoming, with antique furniture that seemed to tell stories from generations past. On the second floor, the children's rooms were arranged so that they all had their own space, but were not too far apart. Each room had its own personality, reflecting the girls' tastes and preferences. Pictures hung on the walls, toys scattered on the floor and beds covered with warm, comfortable blankets. However, it was in the dark corridors and forgotten corners that the unsettling presence seemed to hide, watching every movement. The master suite, where Roger and Carolyn slept, was the largest of all. With a panoramic view of the surrounding fields, it was a place of apparent tranquility. But like the other rooms in the house, it was not immune to the supernatural occurrences that began to manifest themselves. The basement, a place that was supposed to be storage, became a constant source of discomfort, especially for Roger, who often smelled a strong, inexplicable smell coming from there. The mansion also had an attic, full of old trunks and furniture covered in dust. This space, rarely visited, emanated a feeling of abandonment and mystery, as if the house's darkest secrets were hidden there. As the days passed, the large, spacious house, which was supposed to be a refuge for the Perron family, turned into a maze of terror and apprehension. As the family tried to maintain normalcy amid the disturbing events, the nights became increasingly difficult. What started as whispers and footsteps soon turned into more physical manifestations, leaving Roger and Carolyn desperately searching for answers. Initially, moving to the farm represented a dream come true for the Perrons. Roger, tired of the frenetic pace of the city, saw country life as an opportunity to reconnect with nature and provide a healthy, peaceful environment for his daughters to grow up. He imagined sunny days working the land, teaching girls about farming, and enjoying calm nights under a starry sky, free from urban distractions and dangers. Carolyn, for her part, had equally high expectations for her new home. She dreamed of a home full of laughter and happy memories, a place where her daughters could explore and play freely, safely. The prospect of raising the girls in a spacious, natural environment, far from the negative influences of the city, seemed perfect. Carolyn could already envision family dinners in the large rustic kitchen, cozy times around the fireplace on cold winter nights, and birthday parties in the large backyard during the summer. The children, although a little apprehensive about the move, were excited about the idea of living in such a big house full of history. Each of them dreamed of their own room, decorated with their favorite toys and with enough space for their games. They imagined adventures in the vast fields around the house, discovering hidden secrets and creating even stronger bonds between the sisters. The farm seemed like the perfect setting for the fairy tales that filled their imaginations. However, as the days passed, these expectations began to be challenged by the dark reality that the house hid. The promise of a new beginning and a safe haven was gradually replaced by an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Roger and Carolyn struggled to remain optimistic and protect their daughters from the growing sense of danger, but the disruptive influence of their environment became increasingly difficult to ignore. The hope that the farm could be a place of peace and happiness began to fade as the supernatural events intensified. Visions of a bright future for the Perron family in their new home were eclipsed by the mysteries and horrors that unfolded day after day. The house, which once seemed like a sanctuary, turned into an invisible battlefield between the family and the inexplicable forces that inhabited the place. As grim reality set in, the Perron family began to witness increasingly disturbing phenomena. The feeling of security was quickly replaced by constant unrest as supernatural events intensified, affecting each member of the family in profound and frightening ways. From the first days in their new home, the Perron family noticed something peculiar and unsettling. The air inside the house seemed thicker, almost palpable, charged with an energy that no one could explain. The feeling was as if the house itself was breathing, emitting a constant vibration that penetrated the bones of each person who lived there. It was an invisible but undeniably real presence that caused a feeling of discomfort and apprehension. Carolyn, particularly sensitive to these changes, felt a constant tightness in her chest, as if the weight of the house's past was constantly on her shoulders. It was a feeling that was difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore. At night, this energy seemed to intensify, enveloping the rooms in a darkness that went beyond the simple absence of light. Shadows seemed to move, and the silence was often interrupted by unexplained and disturbing noises. The girls also began to feel the impact of this energy. Andrea, the oldest, described a feeling of being constantly watched, even when she was alone in her room. The youngest, Cynthia and April, had recurring nightmares and would wake up in the middle of the night, crying and refusing to go back to bed. It was as if something or someone was always there, lurking, waiting to reveal itself. Roger, trying to maintain rationality, initially attributed these feelings to natural factors, the old house and the changes in winter weather. However, over time, even he could not ignore the persistent feeling of being watched and the constant oppression that seemed to emanate from the walls of the house. Even relaxing family moments in the living room were often interrupted by a sudden drop in temperature or an inexplicable noise coming from an empty room. These feelings of heavy energy and charged air began to eat away at the family's spirit, slowly eroding the joy and hope they had brought with them. Each day spent on the farm seemed to drain a little more of the Perrons' vitality, leaving them increasingly tired and discouraged. The house, which had once been a symbol of a new beginning, now felt like a prison, where the very atmosphere conspired against the family's well-being. As the oppression and unexplained phenomena intensified, members of the Perron family began to experience even more disturbing and visible events. What were once just sensations and noises now manifested themselves in a tangible way, forever changing the perception of reality on the farm. It was during the first few weeks after the move that children began to report something even more alarming. The nights, which should have been peaceful and restorative, became periods of terror. Andrea, the eldest daughter, was the first to hear. At first, it was just indistinct whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls of her room. She would wake up in the middle of the night, scared and confused, hearing voices that spoke in a low, urgent tone, as if they were discussing ancient secrets. Nancy and Christine, who shared a room, began to have similar experiences. Both often woke up to the sound of wails, almost like muffled cries, that seemed to come from all directions. The girls hugged each other, trying to comfort each other, but the fear was palpable. On certain nights, they would hear their names being whispered, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. The youngest, April, also began to complain about voices calling her and making her cry in fear, refusing to sleep alone. These reports were not just limited to children's bedrooms. Roger and Carolyn, each in their own spaces, also began to hear voices during the night. Roger often got up to investigate, believing that it could be some interference from outside or even an animal. But all his searches were fruitless. There was nothing there, just the heavy silence of the house. Carolyn, in turn, began to notice that the voices were not just indistinct murmurs, but often included words and phrases, some in a language she did not recognize. These events left the family in a constant state of alert and exhaustion. Children, deprived of peaceful sleep, became increasingly frightened and irritable during the day. The atmosphere in the house became tense, with all family members trying to hide their own fear so as not to further alarm others. Everyday life began to fall apart, and the sense of normalcy slipped from the parents' hands. With each report, the realization that something very wrong was happening solidified. The nocturnal voices and laments were more than just hauntings, they were a constant, invasive presence that seemed to want to communicate something, but whose message was shrouded in terror and mystery. The family began to realize that they were not just living in an old house, but sharing the space with something much more sinister and incomprehensible. As time passed, supernatural events became more frequent and intense. Manifestations were no longer limited to sounds and sensations, objects began to move on their own, and spectral apparitions began to become visible, leaving the Perron family on the brink of despair. The first time a bed levitated was a profound shock for the family. It was an ordinary night when Nancy woke up feeling a strange movement beneath her. Startled, she realized that her bed was, in fact, floating a few inches above the floor. Terror paralyzed her as she helplessly watched the bed slowly return to its original position. The incident left deep marks on her mind, and the story spread quickly among the sisters, increasing the climate of fear. In addition to the levitating beds, paintings began to fall inexplicably from the walls. These were not just occasional accidents, pictures were ripped out with such force that the nails were often left bent or pulled out completely. Roger, trying to maintain order and normality, repaired the damage, but the incidents became more and more frequent. With each frame that fell, the family's feeling of helplessness and vulnerability intensified. No matter how many times Roger put them back in place, they always fell back down, as if an invisible force was determined to disturb them. Another disturbing phenomenon that plagued the house was the dust devils that appeared in the rooms without explanation. These dust manifestations were accompanied by a sudden and inexplicable drop in temperature, creating an even more ominous atmosphere. On a particularly scary day, Carolyn walked into the living room to find a whirlwind of dust swirling in the middle of the room. The sight was so unnatural that it left her motionless, watching as the whirlwind dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. These events have become an almost daily occurrence, leaving the family in a constant state of alert. These physical manifestations were accompanied by a growing sense of threat. Each new event seemed more intense and frightening than the last, undermining the family's sanity and strength. Roger and Carolyn, already exhausted and emotionally shaken, found themselves unable to protect their daughters from the horrors happening around them. The girls, increasingly traumatized, avoided being alone and clung desperately to their parents. The house, which was supposed to be a refuge, quickly turned into a battlefield where the Perron family fought against invisible and incomprehensible forces. Each night, new occurrences brought more fear and despair, and the hope of finding a solution seemed more and more distant. The supernatural events showed no signs of abating, on the contrary, they seemed to intensify, as if the house itself were alive and determined to expel its inhabitants. As supernatural events intensified in the Perron household, the daughters began reporting disturbing encounters with unseen presences. Nancy, Christine, and the other girls often shared stories of whispered conversations they heard at night when they should have been sleeping. These voices seemed to come out of nowhere, floating through the air like a distant echo from a dark past. The girls described how the voices tried to communicate, sometimes soft and reassuring, other times agitated and threatening. On one particularly frightening occasion, Christine woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of soft talking coming from the corner of her room. She saw an indistinct figure, ethereal and pale, sitting at the foot of her bed. Her spirit seemed to be muttering something incomprehensible, its eyes fixed on hers with a frightening intensity. Christine, paralyzed by fear, could barely breathe as the spirit slowly disappeared before her eyes. These encounters left deep marks on the children. Nancy began writing in her diary about encounters with invisible friends, trying to understand who these presences were and why they were in the house. Andrea, the eldest, tried to protect her younger sisters, but she herself felt the weight of the apparitions and constant whispers that permeated the atmosphere of the house. Roger and Carolyn, desperate to find a rational explanation for these phenomena, consulted experts and researched the property's history. They discovered that several generations of a family had lived and died there, leaving a legacy of tragedies and buried secrets. Among these stories, the figure of Bathsheba Sherman stood out, whose spirit seemed to be present in the house, especially disturbing Carolyn with her threatening appearances and murmurs. With each new revelation, the Perron family found themselves plunged deeper into a mystery that challenged all their beliefs and notions of reality. What began as a move to a better life quickly turned into a fight for physical and emotional survival as they tried to understand and confront the supernatural forces that surrounded them. Roger, initially skeptical of the supernatural reports haunting his family, had an encounter that left him deeply disturbed. It was a humid and stuffy afternoon when he decided to investigate the basement of the house, looking for an explanation for the strange events that had been occurring. As he descended the dusty stairs, he was hit by a strong, nauseating smell, which made him involuntarily recoil. The smell wasn't just unpleasant, it was poignant and charged with a sense of decay and death. Roger tried to rationalize, thinking of possible natural causes such as humidity or mold, but neither of these explained the intensity and nature of the odor. It was as if something was rotting in the very air of the basement, an invisible presence that he couldn't ignore. As he looked around, trying to identify the source of the smell, his eyes fell on a dark, dimly lit corner. The feeling of being watched made him shudder, but he knew he needed to investigate further. Slowly, Roger advanced, breathing shallowly to avoid the odor, and reached a stone wall covered in damp moss. It was then that he noticed a small passage, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, that seemed to lead to an even deeper space beneath the house. Instinctively, he knew that this passage hid dark secrets that were connected to the disturbing events that haunted his family. With his heart racing, Roger retreated from the basement, determined to find answers before it was too late. This incident marked a turning point for Roger, forcing him to confront the reality that something sinister inhabited not only the dark corners of the house, but also its very depths. From that moment on, his determination to protect his family and unravel the mysteries of the property only intensified, even if it meant facing the unknown with courage and determination. As unexplained phenomena increased and supernatural activity in the home intensified, Roger and Carolyn Perron felt compelled to investigate the history of the Rhode Island property. The decision came after a series of disturbing events that affected not only her peace of mind, but also the safety and well-being of her daughters. They started by consulting local records and talking to older residents of the area. They discovered that the house had been home to several generations of the same family over the centuries. Many of the former owners had lives marked by inexplicable tragedies, including premature deaths, suicides and stories of shady practices. Prominent among these dark accounts was the name of Bathsheba Sherman, a figure shrouded in mystery and fear. Bathsheba had been accused of occult practices and even involvement with the supernatural, leaving a legacy of terror that seemed to echo through the walls of the property to this day. As their research progressed, Roger and Carolyn came across disturbing accounts from other ancient residents who had also experienced supernatural events in those lands. Some spoke of unexplained sightings, while others shared stories of strange sounds and unseen presences that haunted the darkest corners of the property. These discoveries only increased the couple's determination to find a solution to the problems that plagued their family. The property's history revealed itself like a macabre puzzle, where each piece added a new layer of mystery and danger. Roger and Carolyn knew that to protect their daughters and restore peace to their home, they would need to face the supernatural forces that refused to be ignored. This research journey became not only a search for answers, but also a test of courage and determination in the face of the unknown. As fear and uncertainty grew around them, the couple was determined to uncover the truth behind the horrors that had taken hold on their Rhode Island farm. As Roger and Carolyn delved deeper into their research into the history of the Rhode Island property, they were confronted with a macabre and haunting past. They discovered detailed records of tragic deaths that haunted previous generations of the home's owners. Among the disturbing reports were unexplained suicides, mysterious drownings in the nearby river, and even brutal murders that left deep scars on the land and the souls of those who lived there. The Perrons found documented evidence of people who died in horrific ways in and around the property over the centuries. From stories of residents who, driven mad by inexplicable sights and sounds, took their own lives, to reports of individuals who disappeared in the turbulent waters of the river that snaked near the farm. Furthermore, police records and old diaries revealed incidents of extreme violence among the estate's residents, some of which ended in bloody and unexplained murders. With each discovery, Roger and Carolyn felt the gravity of what they faced. Stories of past tragedies and horrors were not just urban legends or tales to scare children. They were accounts of lives cut short by forces that seemed beyond comprehension, permeating the land and the halls of the house with a dark, oppressive energy. These revelations only increased the couple's urgency to find a solution to the supernatural events that plagued their family. With each new discovery, her determination to solve the mystery and protect her daughters grew, even in the face of the unknown and the danger that seemed to always lurk in the darkest corners of the property. The property's history revealed itself not only as a setting for inexplicable phenomena, but as a dark testimony to human frailty and the hidden forces that can inhabit the most unexpected places. Roger and Carolyn knew that to find peace, they would need to confront the macabre past that haunted their Rhode Island farm. As Roger and Carolyn Perron delved into the macabre history of the Rhode Island estate, a shadowy figure emerged from the ancient records, Bathsheba Sherman. Known locally for her life marked by rumors of occult practices and her tragic death, Bathsheba was seen as a sinister presence who continued to haunt the house. Bathsheba Sherman was a woman of singular beauty, but her aura was always shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Rumors that she practiced witchcraft and were involved with dark forces circulated among local residents. Her death, marked by a brutal suicide on the property, left an indelible mark on the history of the region. Accounts about Bathsheba Sherman were varied and disturbing. Some described ghostly apparitions, where his pale figure dressed in black was seen wandering the corridors of the house, casting cold and menacing glances. Others spoke of her ability to manifest in dreams and visions, especially disturbing Carolyn with her presence. The Perrons discovered that Bathsheba was seen as a symbol of disgrace and curse on the estate. Her presence seemed to be linked to the supernatural events that tormented the family, intensifying the terror and the feeling that something sinister inhabited the darkest corners of the house. As they explored deeper into the mysteries surrounding Bathsheba Sherman, Roger and Carolyn realized that confronting the spirit of this historical figure would be crucial to restoring peace and security to their home. However, Bathsheba Sherman's presence revealed itself not only as a supernatural phenomenon, but as a dark testament to the depths of evil that resided on the Rhode Island estate. Stories about Bathsheba Sherman were whispered by locals with a mixture of fear and fascination. According to the oldest accounts, Bathsheba was seen as a woman of enigmatic beauty, but her presence was accompanied by a sinister aura. She was accused of practicing witchcraft and engaging in dark rituals on the grounds of the Rhode Island estate. Rumor had it that Bathsheba kept dark secrets and that her influence extended beyond the limits of human life. It was alleged that she performed rituals to invoke evil forces and that she made sinister pacts in exchange for power and immortality. These stories fueled the belief that her death was not just a suicide, but a final act of despair and condemnation. Bathsheba Sherman's suicide became an integral part of the dark narrative surrounding the estate. It was said that she hanged herself under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind an aura of curse that has haunted everyone in the house ever since. Her last moments have been described as an act of liberation or passage into a realm beyond human understanding, as her spirit, rooted in the ground she called home, continued to echo in every shadow and dark hallway of the house. These local stories not only amplified the mystery surrounding Bathsheba Sherman, but also provided a possible explanation for the supernatural events that plagued the Perron family. Roger and Carolyn, confronted with these disturbing legends, began to realize that her battle was not just against inexplicable phenomena, but against an ancient and sinister force that demanded to be understood and confronted. Faced with the increasingly disturbing and inexplicable events plaguing their family, Roger and Carolyn Perron felt they needed expert help. After consulting local residents and researching similar cases, they discovered renowned exorcists Ed and Lorraine Warren, known for their work with paranormal phenomena and haunted house investigations. Reluctantly, but driven by the need to protect their daughters and restore peace to the house, Roger and Carolyn contacted the Warrens. They explained the supernatural events they had experienced since moving to the farm in Rhode Island, describing the inexplicable sounds, the shadowy apparitions, and the oppressive presence that seemed to permeate the rooms of the house. Ed and Lorraine Warren, known for their meticulous and compassionate approach to dealing with the supernatural, agreed to visit the Perron estate. The Warrens' investigative team arrived armed with specialized equipment to detect and document paranormal activity, while the experienced exorcists themselves prepared to confront the entities haunting the house. For Roger and Carolyn, the Warrens' arrival represented a hope of finally understanding and, hopefully, freedom from the dark forces that threatened their family. However, they also feared what might be discovered during the investigation, aware that confronting the supernatural could uncover even more disturbing truths about the property's sinister history. Ed and Lorraine Warren, armed with their vast experience and the sacred rituals they had learned throughout their careers, began preparations to cast out the tormented spirits haunting the Perron property. They conducted a meticulous investigation, using advanced equipment to detect and record paranormal activity in the different rooms of the house. After days of study and preparation, the Warrens decided to perform an exorcism ritual in the house. They met with Roger and Carolyn Perron, explaining to them the steps that would be necessary to try to purify the environment and remove the malevolent entities that resided there. The Perron couple, mixing hope and apprehension, agreed to perform the rituals, knowing that it was their last hope of restoring peace and security to their daughters. In the heart of the night, under the heavy silence and gloomy hallways of the house, the Warrens began the ritual. With ancient words and ceremonial gestures, they tried to invoke a divine light that would dispel the shadows that clung to the property. The atmosphere became tense as the presence of the entities became more palpable, challenging the exorcists in their attempt to banish the deep-rooted evil. For what seemed like endless hours, the ritual continued, as the Warrens and Roger and Carolyn faced a battle against forces beyond human comprehension. Strange roars and chilling whispers echoed through the corridors, testifying to the resistance of the tormented spirits. However, the exorcists persisted, guided by faith and the conviction that love and light could triumph over the darkness that haunted the house. Despite the Warrens' tireless efforts and the rituals performed to expel the tormented spirits, the atmosphere in the Perron home did not improve. On the contrary, the paranormal events became even more intense and disturbing after the intervention of the exorcists. The appearances of dark shadows and ghostly figures increased in frequency, while strange noises echoed through the empty hallways during the quietest hours of the night. The Warrens, perplexed by the intensification of the phenomena, continued their investigations with renewed dedication. Using advanced analysis and recording techniques, they attempted to capture concrete evidence of the spirits still clinging to the house. However, each attempt at communication or exorcism seemed to inflame the entities further, as if their involvement had aroused a hostile and aggressive response. For Roger and Carolyn Perron, the situation became a test of endurance and faith. They fought to maintain normalcy for their daughters, protecting them from the horrors unfolding before them. The girls, increasingly frightened and affected by the supernatural events, cried out for a solution that did not seem to come, despite the desperate efforts of everyone involved. Meanwhile, the property's reputation as a haunt only grew among local residents and paranormal investigators. Reports of unexplained incidents in the Perron household spread quickly, fueling the belief that something evil and untamable inhabited their domain. The presence of Bathsheba Sherman, in particular, continued to be a focal point of speculation and fear, a shadow of the past that refused to dissipate. Faced with these mounting challenges, Roger and Carolyn Perron faced an agonizing decision: continue fighting the supernatural forces that threatened to consume their family, or consider a more drastic solution to escape the horror that had taken root in their home. Bathsheba Sherman, the dark, enigmatic spirit who haunted the Perron home, focused her energy on terrorizing Carolyn. From the first days of her intervention at the estate, Carolyn began to feel Bathsheba's presence in increasingly disturbing ways. Fleeting shadows moved in the corners of the rooms, while an inexplicable cold enveloped Carolyn whenever she entered certain spaces in the house. Bathsheba seemed to have a special fixation on Carolyn, as if she saw her as a channel for her malevolent influence. During the darkest, quietest nights, Carolyn would be awakened by intrusive dreams and visions of a pale, sinister figure hovering over her bed. Bathsheba's whispering voice echoed in her ears, casting doubts and fears that began to eat away at her sanity. The Warrens, noticing Bathsheba's intensifying focus on Carolyn, redoubled their efforts to protect the Perron family matriarch. They performed protective rituals around Carolyn, creating safe zones in the house where Bathsheba's presence seemed to momentarily diminish. However, the spirit persisted, testing the limits of human endurance and challenging the exorcist's abilities to contain it. For Roger and his daughters, watching Carolyn face this torment was distressing. They felt powerless in the face of the relentless nature of the supernatural events that threatened to consume their mother and wife. Love and family unity were their only defenses against the malevolent influence that tried to intertwine with their everyday lives. As Bathsheba's spirit continued her crusade of terror, the Perron family faced a crucial crossroads: remain and fight the evil rooted in the house, or consider drastic measures to escape the nightmare unfolding around them. Despite the Warrens' tireless efforts and the meticulous rituals performed to expel the tormented spirits, the results were disappointing. Each attempt at exorcism and sacred ritual only seemed to provoke a more intense reaction from the supernatural entities that plagued the Perron household. Apparitions of Bathsheba Sherman, in particular, became more frequent and disturbing, challenging the traditional methods of exorcists. Ed and Lorraine Warren, faced with the complexity and malevolence of the forces they faced, admitted the ineffectiveness of their initial efforts. The power that inhabited the property seemed to resist conventional methods of exorcism, leaving the exorcists perplexed and discouraged by the persistence of the evil that surrounded them. For the Perron family, frustration grew as paranormal events continued to increase in intensity and violence. Each night brought new scares and torments, as Bathsheba's presence became a constant threat to the safety and sanity of everyone in the house. Roger and Carolyn, desperate to protect their daughters and restore the peace they once hoped to find on that property, felt increasingly isolated in their struggle against the supernatural forces that enveloped them. While the Warrens reevaluated their approach and explored new strategies to confront the evil that was manifesting itself, the Perron family faced a painful reality: their enemies were invisible, ruthless, and apparently immune to conventional methods of expulsion. The battle for the soul of the Perron house was far from over, and each attempt at resistance seemed to only fuel the power of the evil forces that resided there. After months of anguish and despair in the face of the supernatural events that haunted their home, the Perron family came to the painful conclusion that there was no solution within those cursed walls. Exorcism attempts failed to dispel the evil presence that continued to haunt them relentlessly. Roger and Carolyn, deeply concerned about the physical and emotional well-being of their 5 daughters, made the final decision to abandon their Rhode Island property. After so many sleepless nights, constant fear and the constant presence of evil, the family saw no other alternative than to seek a new beginning away from what had become a nightmare. In 1980, they packed their lives into boxes and left behind the farm that initially seemed like a promising home. Saying goodbye to that house, where so many happy memories were eclipsed by inexplicable horrors, was a step of faith in search of safety and peace. Although they left the physical location behind, the scars of the experience would haunt the Perron family for the rest of their lives. The terror they faced on that Rhode Island farm left deep scars, silent witnesses to an epic battle between good and evil that defied human understanding. For Roger, Carolyn and their daughters, the future would be marked by a journey of healing and recovery, as they tried to leave behind the shadows that had haunted them for years. Thus, the house where they hoped to build their lives became just a dark page in their family history, a painful reminder of the limits of human understanding in the face of the unknown and the unexplainable. After leaving the haunted house in Rhode Island behind, the Perron family faced a long process of reflection on the events they experienced. Each member of the family carried with them the indelible marks of that harrowing experience. For Roger and Carolyn, parents who had sought a safe home to raise their daughters, the feeling of failure and powerlessness in the face of the supernatural was overwhelming. The children, in turn, carried disturbing memories of whispering voices in the shadows and of presences that could not be seen but felt like a constant pressure on their young minds. Each of them had their own stories of fear and terror to tell, marked by sleepless nights and a feeling of imminent danger that never left them completely at peace. What disturbed the family most was the feeling that the experience had irrevocably changed them. They were no longer the same individuals who had entered that house with hope and optimism. Now they were survivors of a confrontation with the unknown, the consequences of which would continue to echo through their lives. As they tried to rebuild their lives in a new home away from the shadows of the Rhode Island farm, the Perron family found solace in each other. Together, they learned to cherish every moment of peace and normality, knowing that the price of tranquility was high and that the memories of that haunted house would never completely leave them. After leaving the haunted house in Rhode Island behind, the Perron family faced a long process of reflection on the events they experienced. Each member of the family carried with them the indelible marks of that harrowing experience. For Roger and Carolyn, parents who had sought a safe home to raise their daughters, the feeling of failure and powerlessness in the face of the supernatural was overwhelming. The children, in turn, carried disturbing memories of whispering voices in the shadows and of presences that could not be seen but felt like a constant pressure on their young minds. Each of them had their own stories of fear and terror to tell, marked by sleepless nights and a feeling of imminent danger that never left them completely at peace. What disturbed the family most was the feeling that the experience had irrevocably changed them. They were no longer the same individuals who had entered that house with hope and optimism. Now they were survivors of a confrontation with the unknown, the consequences of which would continue to echo through their lives. As they tried to rebuild their lives in a new home away from the shadows of the Rhode Island farm, the Perron family found solace in each other. Together, they learned to cherish every moment of peace and normality, knowing that the price of tranquility was high and that the memories of that haunted house would never completely leave them. So we conclude the intriguing saga of the Perron family and the terrifying events that marked their lives forever. Their experiences remind us that the hidden world may be closer than we imagine. If you enjoyed this horror story and want to explore more fascinating narratives like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell to receive all the updates. Leave your comment below sharing your own stories of supernatural events or suggestions for the next videos.